Imagine for a moment that beneath every opinion, every memory, and every desire you carry, there is something deeper, something older. A silent architecture resting beneath your thoughts like a hidden blueprint, not imposed by culture or conditioning, but woven into the fabric of your being, awaiting recognition. As Helena P. Blavatsky once taught, the human spirit is not evolving toward divinity. It is awakening to what was always divine. So before we journey inward, I invite you to like and subscribe, but only if it truly resonates with your soul. There is a pattern within you. It is not a metaphor. It is an actual structure of consciousness, a vibrational template, one that reflects the Christ mind, pure, orderly, radiant. It doesn't scream for attention. It doesn't compete with ego. It waits, quietly. It waits for your thought to grow still enough, focused enough, devoted enough to remember it. The blueprint of ascension is not hidden in the stars or encoded in esoteric manuscripts alone. It is encoded in you, in the structure of your awareness, in the symmetry of your spiritual anatomy. And the only barrier between you and this living pattern is distortion, false stories, borrowed beliefs, emotional static. You were not born with distortion. You were taught it, layer by layer, fear by fear. And now ascension is not the addition of power, but the removal of confusion. The Christ mind does not need to be imported into you. It needs to be uncovered, aligned with, embodied. This first step requires inner honesty, not confession, not judgment, but the willingness to say, if I am not living from clarity, then something within me has fallen asleep. Not broken, not damaged, just asleep. And awakening it is your task, not by force, not by mystical ritual, but by turning inward with purpose, with structure, with devotion. Right now, you may still believe that change requires external permission, that you need more credentials, more guidance, more validation. But ascension begins with a single realization: you already contain the code. The key is how you think, what you feel, what you allow to shape your moment-by-moment vibration. The mind you carry today is not fixed. It is programmable, not in a robotic sense, but in the sense that it will take on whatever pattern is repeated with clarity and emotional energy. And if that pattern is the Christ vibration, centeredness, self-honesty, compassion without indulgence, your entire life begins to reflect it. Not instantly, not theatrically, but irreversibly. You were not made to hustle for divinity. You were made to recognize it as your native state. The same way a tuning fork recognizes its note, you are built to remember your pattern once you encounter it again. This blueprint of ascension isn't something you achieve. It's something you activate through alignment. And the first alignment is always mental, because the mind is the entry point to everything else. It governs emotion, it influences physiology, it shapes perception. And perception is what determines what you believe is possible, not because reality bends to your opinions, but because you literally can't access what your consciousness refuses to recognize. Blavatsky spoke of the divine spark not as a poetic idea, but as an operating principle of life itself. Your job is not to fabricate that spark, it is to uncover it by withdrawing attention from everything that obscures it. This is why spiritual work begins in thought, not just with affirmations, but with clarification. What do I believe about myself? What tone dominates my inner world? Is my consciousness clean, or is it filled with static? If you're honest, you'll see it's often the latter. And that's not failure. That's the beginning of power. Because only when you see the distortion can you release it, and releasing it is what frees up the space for the Christ pattern to emerge. That pattern is not mystical nonsense. It's energetic order. It's the default vibration of the soul before fear infected it. And it still lives in you, untouched, unharmed, waiting. This audiobook will not give you that pattern. It will remind you how to return to it, through thought, through vibration, through will, through clarity. But first, remember this. The blueprint is already within you. Don't try to become something. Focus instead on removing everything that isn't aligned with who you already are beneath the noise. And in doing so, you will not rise above your humanity. You will redeem it. Thought is the entry point. Before feeling, before belief, before change can ripple through your body, your relationships, your world, it begins in the quiet place where you shape the direction of mind. And the Christ mind does not arrive by accident. It is invoked by precision, the kind of clarity that cuts through habit and reveals pattern. You don't drift into ascension, you think your way toward it. As soon as you begin observing thought instead of reacting from it, you step into spiritual authorship. The blueprint of ascension activates not through lofty language or spiritual theatrics, but through deliberate inner order. And that order begins with recognizing that thought is not harmless, it's causative, it sends signal, it instructs the law. The Christ vibration is not an abstract holiness. It is mental alignment with a divine template of balance, vision, compassion, and inner authority. It moves through clarity, not confusion, through focus, not emotional drift. And if your thought is scattered, reactive, or passive, that vibration can't hold. You are always thinking. The question is, are you thinking with intention, or are you on repeat, echoing yesterday's noise? Are you producing thought like a builder lays stone, or absorbing it like fog? The Christ mind does not operate from fog. It does not guess, it does not panic, and it does not spiral. It holds, it builds, it cuts away what does not belong. This is not about cold intellect, it's about mental fidelity. Your mind must be trained, not to obsess, but to stabilize, to hold the image, to resist the urge to collapse into contradiction. Because every thought carries vibration, and vibration is law. You don't need to feel spiritual for it to work. You just need to think consistently enough for the field to respond. Helena P. Blavatsky understood this. Thought is the sculptor of the unseen, the building block of form, the architect of the invisible. If you don't control it, you don't control anything else. Thought sets the path your emotion walks down. Thought shapes what your body expects. Thought filters what your eyes see and what your heart believes. So what happens when your thought is laced with doubt? Everything downstream is tainted. The pattern becomes unstable. You start projects with excitement, then sabotage them with second-guessing. You pray for abundance, but carry the mental tone of survival. You speak of alignment while entertaining mental pictures of failure. And the law must respond to the dominant tone, not the occasional affirmation. This is why thought must be purified, not through force, but through examination. Not all thought is worthy of your repetition. Not all thought is yours. Some is inherited. Some is cultural static. Some is trauma dressed as logic. And if you're not paying attention, those thoughts shape your life without ever being questioned. The Christ mind questions. It doesn't accept distortion just because it's familiar. It doesn't let inherited fear pass as wisdom. It doesn't let the ego narrate unchecked. It chooses thought like a gardener chooses seed, only what will yield the harvest of alignment. To live this way, you must become mentally disciplined, not harsh, but consistent. You must learn the difference between thought that expands your vibration and thought that fractures it, between the inner voice of guidance and the inner noise of panic. And you must build the strength to stay with the chosen pattern even when external results haven't caught up yet. Because here's what most miss. It's not results that create belief, it's repeated thought that creates the vibration which eventually produces results. Your thought is the cause, the world is the echo. If you forget that, you give away the throne. But when you remember it, you reclaim the template. You become an agent of pattern, a spiritual designer, not a beggar of miracles, but a builder of field. And that field begins in the silence between thoughts. In the decision to hold a vibration, not because it's easy, but because it's true. You are not waiting for your environment to change. You are holding thought long enough for the world to bend around your clarity. This is what it means to ascend in consciousness, to choose the thought that reflects the pattern, not the problem. You don't rise through emotional bursts. You rise through steady mental elevation. Thought is the first tool of ascent, and it's always in your hand. Vibration is not chaos. It is not a mystery floating in the ether, responding to moods or wishful affirmations. Vibration follows law, subtle, exact, uncompromising law. And once you understand that law, you stop hoping for transformation and start aligning with the very forces that create it. The Christ mind does not rise out of inspiration alone. It rises through harmonic order, a field of consciousness trained to transmit the correct signal without interruption. Helena P. Blavatsky pointed to this principle again and again. The universe is governed by structure, not superstition. What you vibrate, you become. What you repeat, you solidify. And the laws behind that process are not emotional. They are mechanical. This is not to say the universe is cold. On the contrary, it is brilliantly responsive, but it responds to coherence, not confusion. The field doesn't respond to what you occasionally desire. It responds to the dominant tone of your consciousness. And that tone is formed by the thoughts you energize with emotion and repetition. Every time you shift into a new vibration, whether that be peace, clarity, or abundance, you're not simply feeling better. You are recalibrating your energetic instructions. You are tuning your signal, and that signal is received by the field in real time. But here's the catch. The field does not filter for intention. It doesn't ask what you meant. It doesn't compensate for your lack of awareness. It mirrors what is. If your thought is laced with fear and charged with emotion, the law doesn't wait for you to calm down. It reflects it. If your inner world is scattered and contradictory, it delivers mixed signals. This is why understanding the law of vibration is non-negotiable, because it will work, with or without your conscious participation. Most people are not vibrating intentionally. They're reacting emotionally. They're responding to stimulus, looping in memory, echoing old traumas. And then they wonder why their lives repeat themselves like bad radio stations. The answer is always vibration, always pattern, always frequency. But once you take responsibility for that signal, once you realize that it is being read and mirrored by the universe constantly, you stop playing the victim. You become deliberate. You begin to broadcast your inner world with care. You start asking, what is my vibration right now? Is this signal clean or cluttered? Is it aligned with what I want or what I fear? This is not hypervigilance. It's spiritual maturity. You are not becoming obsessed with how you feel every second. You're becoming attuned to the general tone you carry and learning to adjust it like a dial when it slips. Because the Christ pattern cannot live in distortion. It requires a stable field. It flows through order, not resistance. And when you align your vibration with that order, through right thought, emotional regulation, and mental clarity, you don't chase outcomes. You attract them. You build a magnetic field around your being that reflects the very image of divine mind. It's not that nothing ever goes wrong, but when turbulence comes, you don't collapse. You realign. You stay with the frequency. You honor the law instead of panicking against it. And this consistency is what builds power. When your vibration becomes stable enough, things begin to organize around you without explanation. Not because you're manipulating reality, but because reality responds to coherence. That's what this section is about. Coherence. The field of vibration is governed by law. If your inner world is chaotic, so is your outer experience. If your signal is pure, results arrive in form, not as magic, but as magnetism. You cannot hack this process. You cannot beg your way around it. You align with it, or you don't. You transmit from harmony or from noise. But once you understand the structure, you can work within it, boldly, clearly, consistently. And the moment you do, things begin to flow, not perfectly, not instantly, but lawfully. And that is far more powerful than any shortcut. So stop guessing, stop reacting, start tuning. You are the broadcaster. The field is listening, and the laws behind it are already in motion. Let your vibration match the order you were born to embody. Everything you touch, everything you attract, everything you hold, flows downstream from one thing: how you see yourself. Not how others see you, not how you wish to be, but the actual day-to-day tone of your inner identity. Your self-concept is not just psychological, it is vibrational. It is the throne of frequency upon which all your reality rests. Helena P. Blavatsky hinted at this when she wrote of the illusion of personality as both a trap and a gateway. If you cling to a fragmented or diminished self-concept, you short-circuit the Christ pattern. If you rise into the true self, anchored in divine likeness, but not puffed by ego, you become a transmitter of higher order. The Christ mind does not function through insecurity. It does not waver in self-value. It does not negotiate its existence to please others or fit into inherited molds. It knows itself, and in knowing, it vibrates with unwavering clarity. This is not arrogance. This is identity rooted in law, not in emotion. You cannot sustain a frequency that your self-image rejects. You may touch it briefly, feel a spiritual high, repeat a powerful affirmation, but if the identity behind the scenes whispers, "I'm not ready, I'm not worthy, I'm still broken," that contradiction will erode the signal. This is why ascension isn't a matter of tools or techniques. It is a matter of permission, not from the universe, but from within. If your self-concept is still tied to past failures, trauma, social conditioning, or guilt, you'll keep sabotaging your rise, not because you're weak, but because you're vibrating from a version of yourself that can't yet hold the new pattern. So the question becomes, who are you when no one's watching? What do you believe you deserve, not intellectually, but energetically? What do you prepare for, expansion or loss, support or struggle? The answers aren't always comfortable, but they are revealing. You might think you're manifesting consciously, but if your self-image says, "People like me never get that," or "this never lasts," then no tool in the world can override that baseline signal. The law doesn't follow language. It follows the felt vibration you live in daily. Changing your self-image isn't about faking confidence. It's about remembering what was never untrue. You were never unworthy. You were never a mistake. You were never separate from Source. Those ideas were taught, absorbed, repeated, but they're not the foundation of who you are. You were always a vessel for divine circulation, always a channel for radiant order. The only thing in question is whether you'll accept that identity, not as a theory, but as a lived pattern of thought and feeling. And that pattern must be practiced. You build a new self-concept the same way you build muscle, with repetition, with attention, with focused intensity. You refuse to entertain thoughts that betray your chosen identity. You don't let the old version of yourself speak unchallenged. You don't indulge in self-deprecation disguised as humility. True humility is alignment with truth, not minimization of self. If your self-concept is fragile, life will reflect that. You'll find yourself shrinking from opportunities, sabotaging relationships, under-asking, over-apologizing. Not because life is against you, but because you have instructed it to mirror a distorted version of you. And when you change that instruction, when you hold a new tone, not in fleeting bursts, but as your daily frequency, everything shifts. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because you've become bigger than the problems you used to bow to. The new self-concept must be constructed from truth, not hype. It is not built on emotion, but on energetic stability. It says, "I am a Christ channel. I am a radiant transmitter. I do not beg. I do not collapse. I hold, and you must hold." When fear tries to whisper, when doubt echoes back, you stay with the new tone. You defend your field not from anger, but from loyalty to your spiritual architecture. Because once your self-image stabilizes, everything around you must begin to match it. The throne of vibration is inside you. If you occupy it, the world reorganizes. If you abandon it, the world reflects that abandonment. So return to the throne, not later. Now let the new self become your new standard. Let your field speak clearly. This is who I am now, not in theory, in tone, in practice, in vibration, and then. Let the law do what it always does. Emotion is where the blueprint becomes breath. It is the charge behind your thought, the living voltage that determines whether your signal is received as static or power. Without emotional clarity, even the most precise thought collapses into noise. Emotion is not secondary. It is structural. It is the fuel that either lifts your vibration or short-circuits it before it can take form. The Christ mind cannot anchor itself in you unless the emotional body is cleared and calibrated. You may be thinking in the right direction, but if your inner climate remains clouded with fear, shame, unprocessed grief, or inherited guilt, the pattern cannot hold. Thought sets the shape, but emotion determines its density, and density is what gives spiritual ideas the weight to manifest. Helena P. Blavatsky wrote of the astral body as both a mirror and a battlefield. If it is undisciplined, you are pulled constantly between conflicting states, moments of light followed by inexplicable collapse. That collapse is not always mental. It is emotional, a dragging sense of unworthiness, a heaviness in the chest, a silent exhaustion that no rest seems to touch. This is the realm where many seekers stall. They know the words, they know the principles, but emotionally something remains unmoved, flat, dead. That deadness is not a moral failing. It is an energetic bruise, a place where feeling once flowed, but now trembles in retreat. This dead zone of feeling must be walked through, not bypassed, not painted over with affirmations. It must be met. There are parts of you that no longer respond to inspiration because they've heard it all before. They waited silently during years of strain. They adapted to survival. They watched you rise and fall, and they no longer trust your sudden bursts of vision. These parts will not obey intellectual direction. They are waiting for emotional consistency, proof that the pattern will hold this time. If you want the Christ mind to live in you fully, you must go where the numbness resides. You must bring light to the areas where emotion has hardened into indifference. You must reawaken the capacity to feel not just joy, but honesty, not just passion, but pain, if it is what clears the blockage. Feeling is not a weakness. It is the mechanism by which consciousness opens its gates. But to feel rightly, you must feel fully. Emotion held in distortion will poison every clear thought you try to send. Emotion ignored becomes sabotage. Emotion suppressed turns into fatigue, indecision, or bitterness. You cannot climb while dragging the weight of unacknowledged sorrow. So allow yourself to feel, not to indulge, not to spiral, but to clear. Let grief rise and then pass. Let anger surface and then dissolve. Let shame be seen and then be met with truth. This is not therapy. This is vibrational hygiene. It is the cleaning of the lens so that light can return, and it will return. Because the Christ vibration is not waiting for you to be perfect, it is waiting for you to be transparent. It moves not through the persona, but through the opened vessel. When the emotional body is relaxed, clarified, and reconnected to truth, the Christ pattern stabilizes. Then the field begins to shimmer again. Not because your life is finally problem-free, but because your emotional center is no longer splitting the signal. You are feeling without fragmenting. You are letting energy move through, not stagnate. You are no longer afraid of your emotional power. You are channeling it. And when you reach that point, something sacred happens. You stop fearing the inner break. You let the heart break open if it must, because you know the light needs somewhere to pour into. You stop resisting the fall, because you understand it's only through the cracking that stillness becomes clarity. This is not poetry. It is spiritual physics. Let the emotion come. Let it rise. Let it break if it must. Because after the rise, after the flood, after the trembling, something deeper settles, something stronger holds. This is how the Christ mind moves, not around your emotion, but through it, not above your pain, but beneath it. The pattern does not fear your tears, it waits patiently on the other side of them. So break if you must, but break open, not apart. Let the feeling come through. Let it cleanse the distortion. Let it empty the body of the ghosts that no longer belong. And once you've felt it all the way through, rise, not as performance, but as proof. Proof that the blueprint was always waiting underneath the noise. At some point on the path you face it, the wall, the veil, the illusion that you are separate from what you seek, separate from the divine, from the Christ mind, from the law, from possibility. And the illusion feels so real because it's not just an idea. It's been reinforced by years of experience, pain, and partial truths. You don't just think you're alone in your journey, you feel it in your bones. And yet, it is false. Helena P. Blavatsky warned that the greatest deception is the belief in separation, not from others, but from your own source. That somewhere between the pure radiance of your origin and the tangled mess of modern identity, a split occurred. And in trying to fix yourself, in trying to become spiritual, become worthy, become enlightened, you deepen the illusion. Because the very trying presumes lack. But the Christ pattern does not arise from lack. It is not added to you. It is awakened within, and it cannot emerge fully until the division within your mind collapses, until the self you present, the self you protect, and the self you avoid are brought into reconciliation. That is where true ascension begins, not when you escape the lower, but when you integrate it. You may feel as though there's a part of you that can never catch up, that is always falling behind the version of you that reads, learns, meditates. You believe that if you just transcend that part, silence it, override it, then you'll finally be aligned. But that part, flawed, tired, insecure, isn't blocking your ascension. Your rejection of it is. The blueprint of the Christ mind is a whole pattern. It does not operate in fragmentation. Every part of you must be invited back to the center, not to be celebrated or condemned, but to be seen. Because until you see the shadow without flinching, without embellishing, without disowning it, your frequency will split. Your thought will wobble. Your vibration will carry static. And static repels the current of divine order. You can't rise while holding parts of yourself in exile. You can't harmonize while you carry secret judgments against your own humanity. Those unspoken agreements, this is too broken, that was too shameful, this part is not spiritual enough, create micro-divisions in your field. And those divisions become leaks, leaks in clarity, leaks in will, leaks in love. The Christ vibration is not a performance of perfection, it is the radiance of internal union. It is a consciousness that no longer wastes energy defending against itself, that no longer negotiates which pieces of the soul are welcome, that no longer silences the wounded voice, but instead listens long enough to integrate its truth. That's what the collapse of separation requires, not transcendence, wholeness. You will not find your way back to power by pretending the wound doesn't hurt. You will find it by refusing to hide it, by laying it bare to the light, not to wallow in it but to reabsorb it, to transmute the memory of distance into the presence of alignment. The illusion of separation shatters the moment you realize you were never meant to become perfect. You were meant to become whole. In that moment, when nothing is pushed away, when no part of you is left behind, you stop chasing spirituality like a goal and start becoming the pattern it was always pointing you toward. There's no longer an out there, no ascended version of you behind some glass wall, no divine favor waiting to be earned, just alignment, just remembering, just allowing the Christ code to run through your system without interruption. This is where the frequency begins to rise, not with struggle, but with surrender, not with emotional intensity, but with internal reunion. And you'll feel it when it happens, not as euphoria, but as relief. The pressure to perform drops. The noise of judgment quiets, something softens, and then the signal becomes clear. You don't need to abandon your human self to rise. You need to reclaim it as sacred. You don't need to transcend the past. You need to let the past return to its rightful place, behind you, no longer disguised as your identity. There is no outer gate, no divine test, no metaphysical threshold you must pass to earn the next stage. There is only one barrier left, the part of you that still believes you are two, light and dark, sacred and profane, worthy and not. Let that illusion break. Let the noise collapse. Let the division dissolve, because you are not fragmented. You are forgotten. And memory is what heals you. You've never been anything but whole. Silence isn't absence. It isn't emptiness. And it isn't escape. Inner silence, true silence, is a return to original structure. It's where the voice of the Christ pattern speaks most clearly, because it doesn't compete. It waits in stillness, not because it is weak, but because it honors law. The more still the water, the clearer the reflection. But few people reach that silence, not because it's hidden, but because they never stop filling it. They bring noise into the silence. They bring intention, affirmation, visualization, even desperation. They carry an agenda into the sacred room and wonder why they leave unchanged. Silence is not an event. It is a condition, a vibrational atmosphere. And if you want to encounter the Christ template, you must enter into that condition, not just conceptually, but energetically. Helena P. Blavatsky warned that until the mind grows still, the spiritual current remains distorted. Thought continues, but it bends. It reflects not clarity, but anxiety masked as focus, and worse, it mimics understanding while blocking it. Because the mind can memorize truths, it refuses to embody. Inner silence doesn't mean absence of thought, it means absence of resistance. It's the moment when you are no longer rehearsing who you should be and finally resting in what already is. And what already is, beneath the striving, is a precise vibrational structure, the Christ pattern. This template isn't created, it's remembered. It's the spiritual blueprint before interference, and it becomes visible only in stillness, because that is the only state subtle enough to perceive it fully. That's why those addicted to stimulation cannot find peace. They are waiting for the Christ vibration to yell over the chaos, not realizing it never will. The Christ mind isn't louder than your pain, it's deeper. And if you want to hear it, you must sink below the surface, not to escape the noise, but to stop feeding it. You may be tempted to chase new techniques, to add more mantras, more rituals, more layers, but the pattern will not reveal itself through accumulation. It will only emerge through subtraction. That's the power of inner silence. It strips away everything that doesn't belong. The spiritual performance, the compensations, the old mental scaffolding. In silence, all that remains is what was always true. And when you touch that space, pure, unedited presence, you don't need convincing. You just know. But you must be willing to feel the discomfort that comes first. Because the silence you enter at this depth isn't peaceful at first. It's raw. You'll meet the echoes you've ignored. You'll feel the hunger of your own soul asking why you've waited so long to listen. You may even feel a hollowness that nothing external can fill. That hollowness is sacred. That's where the reset happens. If you can stay with that feeling, if you can sit in that vast inner space without flinching, without reaching for something to soothe it, you'll begin to feel something subtle move. It won't be a message. It won't be a sign. It will be a recognition, a remembering. The Christ mind isn't separate from you, it's simply been drowned out. Silence doesn't call the Christ vibration in, it clears the field so you can feel what's already present. This isn't mystical fluff, it's vibrational mechanics. A field cannot hold multiple dominant frequencies, and if you're constantly running signals, thoughts, fears, affirmations, doubts, the pattern will not stabilize. But in silence, everything unnecessary drops, and what remains is the core vibration, alignment, not effort. You don't have to do anything in this silence. You don't have to prove readiness. The very act of entering it, willingly, humbly, without agenda, is the signal that you're finally aligned enough to let the pattern rise. And when it rises, it doesn't speak in words. It speaks in knowing. You sit in silence, and suddenly the need to rush is gone. The tension softens. The mental loops dissolve. Something inside feels accurate, like you've returned to the place where thought begins but doesn't yet divide. This is not detachment. It's contact, the most intimate kind of contact, not with a deity above, but with the law within. And from that contact, everything changes, not because the world bends, but because you do. Your thoughts recalibrate, your body relaxes, your frequency locks in, and circulation begins, all from silence. So let the world spin, let the mind protest, let the ego flinch, but stay anyway. Enter the silence, and when it cracks you open, don't run, let it. Because what breaks in that stillness is everything you no longer need. And what rises after is who you've always been. There comes a time when adding more truth won't help. You don't need another principle, another vision, another sacred quote to repeat. You need a clearing. You need to shed. The Christ pattern cannot anchor itself in a consciousness clogged with obsolete constructs, identities you outgrew but still defend, beliefs you inherited but never questioned, fears you've disguised as wisdom. Purification isn't cosmetic. It's invasive. It doesn't gently ask what you're willing to release. It burns, it breaks, it removes. Helena P. Blavatsky called this the necessity of inner death, not physical, but psychic. The death of the false self, the self you assembled to survive, the self you rewarded for fitting in, the self that took hits for you but, in time, began speaking for you. You've probably felt this moment already, the haunting sense that the life you're living no longer fits the consciousness you're becoming. You say the right words, you apply the right laws, but inside there's static, like you're walking through sacred rituals wrapped in borrowed clothing. The motions are correct, the soul is not. This is the call to purify, not morally but vibrationally. To let go of the images, stories, and roles that no longer resonate with the pattern you now recognize. And this is not about becoming better, it's about becoming honest. Because part of you already knows what must go. It isn't hidden. It's in the friendship you maintain out of guilt, the career that drains your light, the daily narrative that keeps you frozen in an outdated self-image. You don't need another awakening. You need to decide. The blueprint of the Christ mind is exact. It does not overlay chaos. It doesn't negotiate with contradiction. And it won't force itself into a container that refuses to empty. So the question becomes, what are you still protecting that no longer serves you? You might say, I've released so much already, but release isn't measured by emotion. It's measured by vibration. Are you still thinking from the wounds you claim to have healed? Are you still reacting from a script you've vowed to transcend? If so, the pattern hasn't purified. It's just been paused. This is the heartbreak of ascension. You cannot bring everything with you, and the part of you that still hopes to rise while carrying the old weight is the part that must be broken, not destroyed, broken open. You are not being punished. You're being stripped of what was never you to begin with. And yes, it may hurt. Not because truth is cruel, but because falsehoods wrap themselves around your identity. They embed in your habits, your relationships, even your tone of voice. When you remove them, it feels like tearing away skin. But what bleeds is the lie, not the soul. You may grieve. You may feel lost, like someone pulled the floor from under you. That's what it feels like to let the obsolete self die. To look in the mirror and realize you no longer recognize the reflection, not because you're broken, but because you've outgrown the costume. This is the space between selves, the in-between. The dark hallway where the door has closed behind you but the next has not opened. It is sacred, it is disorienting, and it is necessary. Don't rush it. Don't try to rebuild too fast. Stay with the emptiness. Let the silence clean what clarity alone could not. Let the blueprint burn away every layer that covered its light. If it's being stripped, it's because it wasn't true. Let it go. Because on the other side of that collapse is something cleaner, something quieter. Not a stronger version of who you were, but a clearer access point to who you've always been. Not more confident, but more exact. This is what makes you usable to the law. Not your intellect, not your willpower, your purity. The emptiness where noise once lived, the simplicity that returns once illusion is gone. The blueprint doesn't need your performance, it needs your permission. So if you're trembling, if you feel like your identity is falling apart, if you're watching the architecture of your former self dissolve, good. You're being purified, not punished. And the blueprint is already lighting up beneath the debris. Stay in the fire. Let it finish. You're being made usable again. You wanted a straight path. You wanted to rise once and never fall again. You thought ascension meant finally being above the mess, above the weakness, above the old stories that kept circling like crows. But the pattern doesn't move in lines. It moves in spirals. The Christ mind doesn't lift you out of life. It brings you deeper into it. And it does so by revealing your growth in cycles, not through finality. Each time you rise, you meet a familiar threshold, but with a different capacity. Each time you fall, you touch a deeper layer of what still waits to be cleared. The spiral teaches not through escape, but through return, and the wisdom to recognize the pattern when it loops back. Helena P. Blavatsky spoke often of the spiral path, not as failure, but as refinement. The soul does not rise through straight ascent. It sharpens itself through recurrence, through the willingness to revisit what you thought you'd already mastered and meet it with a clearer tone. This is why spiritual fatigue sets in for those who expect finality. Why am I here again? Didn't I heal this already? I thought I was past this. But the spiral isn't regression. It's invitation, an opportunity to respond with more precision, more clarity, more coherence, not to defeat the pattern, but to transmit through it. Each turn of the spiral takes you deeper, and deeper means subtler. The noise is quieter, the resistance is more cunning, the ego is less obvious, but still present. You're not failing, you're being refined. The work becomes quieter, but more powerful, less emotional, more energetic, less reaction, more adjustment. You're no longer fixing, you're tuning. And tuning is relentless, because the Christ vibration doesn't tolerate sloppiness, not out of cruelty, but because its frequency is precise. You can't hold its resonance if you keep distorting your signal, even slightly, even subtly. The more you rise, the more exact the requirements. This is not punishment, it's calibration. But the spiral doesn't just bring difficulty, it brings depth. It brings access to levels of perception, softness, steadiness you didn't know existed when you started. And every loop carries a gift, but only if you don't reject it. Only if you stop asking, why am I here again, and start asking, what's the refinement this time? You'll start to notice that the loop comes with less pain when you no longer resist it. That the lesson isn't a punishment, it's a retuning, and the more you accept the spiral, the faster you stabilize. You move through the loop not by speed, but by frequency integrity. Each loop teaches you that the goal isn't to ascend and never return. The goal is to hold the pattern longer each time, to radiate from a cleaner center, to walk into the familiar scene and remain unchanged. That's when you know you've shifted, not when the world stops testing you, but when your vibration no longer breaks under the test. The path is spiral, because your growth is layered. You are not one self, but many selves collapsing into one signal. And that signal can only stabilize when it has been tested through movement. This is what separates fantasy from embodiment. This is why the pattern must be walked, not imagined. So when you find yourself repeating old terrain, don't recoil, don't spiral into shame. Notice what has changed. Feel how you now hold yourself differently. Speak with more authority. Stay calmer in your core. This is evolution, not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of new conduct in the same territory. You are not who you were last time. You have access to a cleaner tone, a more stable light. Use it. Prove it to yourself in silence. Let your field carry the new resonance, even if no one notices, especially if no one notices. The spiral is not a stage. It is an altar. Each turn is sacred. Each return is a test of your commitment, not to performance, but to pattern fidelity. And you will falter. You will forget. You will be tempted to label the loop as failure. But that's when the spiral breaks open. When you stay steady in a space that used to shatter you, the loop becomes a lever. And from that lever, your next rise begins, not by force, but by resonance earned in repetition. This is the truth few will tell you. Mastery isn't sudden, it spirals. But when you learn to welcome the return, to walk the circle with new alignment, you prove to the law that you are no longer merely inspired, you are embodied. There is a voice within you that speaks without sound. It doesn't argue, it doesn't sell, it doesn't flash. It speaks like a current, steady, internal, irrefutable. This is the inner logos, and it is the vibrational signature of the Christ mind. You do not summon it with effort. You tune to it by subtracting what drowns it out. The logos doesn't compete with your surface mind. It doesn't shout to be heard above your conditioning, your worry, or your planning. It exists beneath those currents, at a level of spiritual bandwidth most people never reach. Not because it's distant, but because it's subtle. And subtlety terrifies a mind addicted to stimulation. Helena P. Blavatsky hinted that the logos is not a message. It's a memory of order, a frequency of original intelligence, and it only speaks when the field is still enough to receive. If your mental sky is filled with inner noise, constant interpretation, emotional turbulence, reactive identity, you will miss it, not because it is hiding, but because you are not home. The inner logos carries no judgment. It doesn't care how far you've fallen or how long you've been off course. It's not your conscience. It's not moralism. It is directional truth, baked into your structure, a compass that never stops spinning, even when you've lost the will to look. But many ignore it, not with hatred, but with distraction. They know the silence exists, but fill it with commentary. They feel the truth rising, but override it with planning. The logos says this way, and the ego says, not yet, I'm not ready, I need to be certain. And so the signal weakens. Then life begins to distort, not as punishment, but as feedback. The body tires, the path clutters, confusion multiplies. Because the logos is not just spiritual, it is functional. It organizes your perception. It filters your decisions. When you ignore it, you don't just lose insight, you lose energetic alignment. Your field destabilizes. The Christ mind is the fully integrated field where the logos speaks and is obeyed. Without hesitation, without drama, without external proof, the voice within becomes the governing vibration. And the more quickly you obey, the more clearly it speaks. But that requires trusting silence more than noise. It requires surrendering your need for consensus. No one else hears the logos when it speaks to you. There will be no applause, no clarity for others, just a knowing in your own center that defies logic but demands loyalty. You've felt it before, the nudge to walk away from something that looked perfect, the pull to stay in something uncertain, the knowing that couldn't be explained but never left you alone. That was the logos. And your choice in that moment wasn't just a decision, it was a declaration of what pattern you serve. Ignore it often enough, and you build a life that looks good but feels dead. You string together achievements that echo with meaninglessness. You perform peace but vibrate with unrest. And no affirmation can override that dissonance. The field knows the difference. But obey the logos, and something shifts. Not because the world rearranges instantly, but because you do. Your field tightens, your clarity sharpens, your vibration becomes decisive. Not controlling, but clean. You stop leaking energy, you stop looping on doubt. You stand in the quiet certainty that you're walking the line of truth, no matter how unconfirmed it looks from the outside. This is what most people fear, the moment when the Logos calls for a pivot with no guarantee, when it asks you to leave something unfinished, to disappoint someone you love, to begin something before you feel ready. And the only evidence you have is resonance. But resonance is the only real compass. Everything else can be faked. Alignment cannot. And so the voice speaks, and you either obey or you delay. And every delay comes at a cost, not of punishment, but of power diffused through hesitation. You begin to split. You say one thing but walk another. You hope for miracles but cancel them with contradiction. You talk of clarity while broadcasting confusion. Until one day your life no longer makes sense, not because it's cursed, but because it's disconnected from its original signal. You return to the Logos not by begging, not by purifying, but by listening. Sitting in the silent ache of indecision until you hear the faint, steady tone that's never stopped calling you home. You may not like what it says, but you will know it's true. And when you move on that knowing, without flinching, without waiting for conditions to confirm it, the spiral quickens, the field tightens, circulation begins. This is the Christ mind, not a voice that leads you to safety, but one that leads you to truth. And when you follow it, everything false begins to fall away. Imagination has been misused, reduced to fantasy, dismissed as child's play, or worse, weaponized by escapists to avoid reality instead of transform it. But in the realm of the Christ mind, imagination is neither illusion nor indulgence. It is spiritual technology, the very interface between inner pattern and outer form. Helena P. Blavatsky knew that imagination was not lesser than reason. It was the bridge to higher order. The Christ vibration doesn't bypass imagination, it moves through it. Every symbol you hold, every image you feel, every vision you give emotional life to becomes a mold the universe must consider. Not because it's wishful, but because it's instructive. You're not imagining to pretend, you're imagining to design. You are interfacing with the law vibrationally, visually, emotionally before it takes form. And that interface, when clean, becomes creative command. But when polluted by fear, by scattered vision, by fantasy ungrounded in alignment, it becomes static. You cannot build from fantasy, but you can build from sacred vision. The difference is integrity. Fantasy is unanchored. It's usually compensating for powerlessness. It daydreams without embodiment, grasps for what hasn't been earned energetically, and rarely returns to the discipline of thought. Sacred imagination is different. It is directed, felt, and grounded in the truth of your divine design. When you imagine rightly, you are not pretending the pattern exists. You are aligning your vision with it. You're allowing the unseen blueprint of the Christ mind to move through symbolic language, images, movement, story. These are not fluff. They are the architecture of manifestation. This is why imagination must be reclaimed, not for escape, but for precision. The clearest field doesn't just think accurately, it sees accurately. It carries within it a felt sense image of what alignment looks like, sounds like, feels like. And from that living image, vibration stabilizes, the signal sharpens, the law responds. Imagination isn't just useful, it's necessary. Try living without it. You'll find yourself reacting, echoing, regurgitating others' thought forms. You'll walk paths built by lesser minds. You'll shrink to fit structures designed by fear. Because without imagination, you cannot author. And without authorship, the Christ pattern has no channel to move through. But imagination alone isn't enough. It must be disciplined. You don't just let your mind wander and hope it lands in paradise. You guide it. You give it fuel, images that carry weight, tone, pattern. You feel those images, not just mentally, but emotionally. You hold them long enough that the subconscious receives them as instruction. That's when the shift begins. And if you've been trained to be practical, this may feel strange at first. You'll resist the practice. Your logic will mock it. You'll feel silly, delusional, naive. That's not truth speaking. That's the inherited voice of those who forgot how to see. They stopped imagining because they couldn't bear to look beyond what had already failed them. But you are not here to repeat that lineage. You are here to reclaim the creative faculty that was given to you as a builder of worlds. The Christ vibration does not manifest through reaction. It manifests through intentional inner imaging, through the held vision of a life that reflects divine order. This means you must choose your inner movies with the same reverence you would choose your prayers. Don't play scenes of failure in your mind and expect stability. Don't cast yourself as the outsider and wonder why no one lets you in. Don't animate images that contradict your spiritual self-concept. Because every time you imagine wrongly, you train your system to expect distortion. And every time you imagine rightly, with emotional integrity and mental steadiness, you increase your capacity to hold the vibration of that outcome before it arrives. Not to manipulate the world, but to build a field so coherent the world has to adjust. This is spiritual technology, sacred imagination. It is not a child's play. It is the tool of ascended builders, Christed minds, those who shape the world not by force, but by clarity of pattern held long enough to become inevitable. So imagine cleanly, not as escape, but as design. Feel the image, sharpen it, protect it, and return to it, not once, but until it lives inside you more vividly than your past. That is not delusion. That is creation. There is a moment when your vision is clear, your thoughts aligned, your emotional field open, and yet nothing moves. The world around you holds still. No response, no echo, no reward. You did the inner work. You dismantled the lie. You cleaned your frequency. But reality stands unchanged, unmoved. And in that stillness, something inside starts to tighten. Not in fear, but in fatigue. The kind of fatigue that doesn't scream, doesn't thrash, doesn't plead. It simply stares at the sky and wonders quietly if this silence is all that's left. This is the crucible few speak of. The waiting. Not the passive kind, not resignation, but the soul-deep stillness that comes when every false move has been surrendered, and now all that remains is the long stretch between alignment and manifestation. You are not lost. You are not wrong. But you are suspended, caught in the sacred pause between pattern and proof. Helena P. Blavatsky understood that this is where the soul is tested, not by suffering, but by silence. It's the desert between the knowing and the having, the space where faith is no longer a word, but a nervous system condition. Can you still walk in the frequency of your pattern with no evidence that it's working? Can you still speak from your center when the outer world mirrors nothing back? The Christ mind holds steady here, not with bravado, not with force, but with inner stillness honed to precision. It does not flinch. It does not rush, because it knows reality bends to pattern, not to panic, and panic is the last layer to break. You will feel dead in this place, not destroyed, but emptied. Nothing excites you. Old dreams feel pale. New ones haven't rooted. Your thoughts are steady, but your pulse feels dull. You are aware, but unlit. This is not failure. This is the sacred void where all false fire burns out. The blueprint is installing. The old field is offline. You are no longer running on adrenaline or story. You are no longer fueled by external stimulation. The deadness is not lifelessness. It is reset. The still, flat frequency that comes before new motion. Most people flee from this. They label it depression. They chase the next idea. They inject noise. They beg for signs. But the Christ vibration does not move in noise. It moves through the soul that can withstand silence without losing signal. This is where trust matures into transmission, where presence sharpens not through excitement, but through endurance. You wake up in the same vibration each day, and you do not let it drop, even when the mirror says nothing. even when the world refuses to clap, even when your inner spark flickers and you're tempted to reach for the false light of distraction. Don't. Stay empty if you must. Walk quietly if the fire won't rise. Let this flatness stretch across your timeline, and don't make it mean failure. It means your pattern is anchoring at a new depth, one where momentum won't be faked, where peace won't be borrowed, where joy won't be performed. This is the collapse of artificial drive. Let the system settle. Let the break finish. Because when it does, when the pattern stabilizes through the dead zone, you won't need hype to function. You won't need confirmation to feel real. The next time the light returns, it will be pure, unborrowed, yours, and it will last. That's the quiet miracle of this season. The shift doesn't come with thunder. It arrives in stillness, when the dead air lifts and the hum returns, when one breath feels different, when one thought lands with new weight, when movement begins again, not because you forced it, but because the blueprint is now fully alive within you. So if you're in that space now, if you feel hollow, tired, still, stay. This is the threshold, the inner death that must happen before the new code can breathe. Don't wake it up too soon. Let the stillness finish its work. And when it breaks, walk forward, not reborn, but restructured. There is a kind of knowing that doesn't arrive through books or voices or sudden clarity. It emerges slowly, like warmth returning to a limb long asleep. It doesn't announce itself. It hums. It steadies. It fills. And when it lands, the shift isn't outward. It's structural. You're not more excited. You're more present. Not more convinced, but more certain. You've crossed something that cannot be reversed. What you're feeling is integration. Not a moment, not a revelation, but the slow, silent confirmation that the blueprint is no longer theory. It's running through your system now, quietly instructing your thoughts, organizing your tone, recalibrating your presence. You're not performing spirituality. You've become the frequency. And strangely, there's no parade for this, no triumphant crescendo, no flash of light, just a deep neutrality. A peace so steady it almost feels bland. The drama is gone, the ache has softened, and you're no longer haunted by the need to figure it out. This is the part where your soul exhales. But it confuses people. They think the absence of emotional spikes means something's wrong, that life should always feel electric if the spirit is near. Yet, what they don't understand is that spirit becomes quiet when it has finally landed, and that stillness is not absence, it's mastery. Helena P. Blavatsky would have called this the descent of the pattern, not as some mystical entity, but as functional consciousness. It enters not as fireworks, but as form. It sharpens your choices, narrows your voice, adjusts your pacing. You don't need to declare alignment anymore. You're radiating it. But something unexpected can happen here. A kind of grief. Because as the Christ pattern stabilizes, it begins to quietly separate you from the person you were. Not with drama, with indifference. You look back on the self that tried so hard, begged for signs, chased perfection, feared silence, and you no longer recognize it. You feel compassion for that self, but not identification. And part of you quietly mourns, because you've lost the struggle. And in losing it, you've lost the version of you who needed it. This is the break. The emotional climax is not fireworks. It is emptiness that no longer frightens you. The climb is over. And the identity that was built on effort begins to collapse, not with noise, but with quiet permission. You don't miss it. But you do feel the space it once filled. And then something rises, not loudly, not as a rush, but as precision. You notice your words changing, not to sound spiritual, but because confusion no longer fits in your mouth. You walk into a space and don't shrink, not because you've achieved confidence, but because you've dismantled false comparison. You're not striving, you're transmitting, and it's clean. No performance, no noise, no reward needed. You're simply operating from the pattern now. The Christ vibration no longer visits. It dwells. It no longer knocks. It governs. You're not using it to shape the world. You are it, shaping the atmosphere before words are spoken. This is when alignment becomes ordinary, not average, but sustainable, unremarkable in the best way. No longer tethered to emotion, no longer addicted to affirmation. You're not on fire anymore. You're running stable current. And that current doesn't spike. It sustains. You may even miss the highs, the urgency, the chase, the feedback. But eventually, you'll see. Those spikes were part of the instability, part of the proof-seeking, part of the nervous system that hadn't yet rested into truth without drama. Now you're here, and nothing's shouting, and nothing's falling, and nothing's missing. This is the quiet reward, coherence that doesn't need an audience. You've become what you sought. You start to notice that you don't need to brace anymore, not for the day, not for the world, not even for your own thoughts. There's a steadiness now, a silent, unshakable alignment that doesn't inflate or collapse. You're not coasting, you're carrying, and that carrying has weight, but it no longer feels like strain. You're no longer keeping up with the vibration, you are the vibration. The Christ pattern that once felt like an idea you had to rise to is now the frequency you walk in, without effort, without second-guessing. And in that field, things begin to respond, not because you're trying to attract, but because you're available to receive without distortion. There's no more push. No more hoping energy will compensate for misalignment. You see what fits. You release what doesn't. Not because you're fearless, but because you're clear. Clarity has replaced adrenaline. Discernment has replaced urgency. But now comes the final refinement. It doesn't show up in breakdowns. It doesn't even show up in challenges. It shows up in how you hold the ordinary. How you move through your morning without checking for signs. How you engage with others without performing your progress. How you rest without guilt. This is where the Christ pattern proves itself, not in crisis, but in continuity, because many can access divinity when inspired. Fewer can carry that frequency into quiet tasks, into grocery stores, into phone calls, into still evenings when no one is watching and no magic is happening. This is where embodiment is tested, in the silence between miracles. And what you find there is profound. That life doesn't need to entertain you anymore. That silence doesn't need to be filled. That the absence of drama is no longer boredom. It's a return to wholeness. The constant search has stopped. Not because you found it, but because you finally realized it was never missing. You're not chasing experiences anymore. You're conducting them, not to prove worthiness, not to feel alive, but simply because creation flows through coherence. The moment you stopped needing confirmation was the moment your frequency became magnetic. That magnetism isn't loud, it doesn't seduce, it doesn't command attention, it doesn't flash its light. It centers the room by existing. People don't know why they feel different around you, but they do. Not because you're better, because you're structured. The chaos within you has gone quiet, and that silence becomes influence. You start seeing how much of the world runs on compensation, on noise trying to cover pain, on performance trying to replace authenticity, and you stop judging it. You simply stop feeding it. Your presence no longer bends. Your attention no longer scatters. And your boundaries are not rules. They are natural consequences of clarity. And then something even more subtle happens. You realize you don't need to keep naming it. The Christ pattern, the blueprint, the alignment, all the language you once clung to as scaffolding now feels unnecessary because once you're living the thing, the label is extra. You are no longer studying light. You are walking as light. Not perfectly, not infallibly, but consistently enough to become predictable to the law. And the law? It loves consistency. It doesn't reward emotional flare-ups. It rewards field coherence. And now your field is coherent, not just in thought, but in being. You don't adjust to match circumstances. Circumstances begin adjusting to match you, not out of magic, out of order. That's the final quiet shift. You stop hoping for order. You start assuming it. And when you do, it stays. You wake one morning and realize there's no arrival, no crescendo waiting, no hidden door. You've been looking for a climax, a final revelation, a sign that the journey has ended and you are now officially ascended. But all you find is presence, not loud, not ecstatic, just undeniably here. The Christ mind doesn't conclude, it sustains, and that's what makes it so radical. You don't finish the work, you become the work. You don't peak, you stabilize. You don't touch divinity once, you carry it everywhere without having to tell the world you did. This is where the spiritual ego finally dies, not with humiliation, but with irrelevance. You stop needing to prove you've changed. You stop collecting mystical credentials. You stop watching your words for fear of sounding unenlightened. Because when truth is real, it doesn't need confirmation. You begin to feel it in the smallest spaces. A pause between thoughts, the way you move through disagreement without losing your balance. The ease with which you say no. The way joy feels quiet now, not like a flash, but like a slow unfolding that doesn't need to be chased. Helena P. Blavatsky might call this the embodiment of higher law, not as mystical achievement, but as functional governance. The law moves through you now, not as command, but as tone. You're not using tools. You are the tool. You're not aligning. You are alignment. This is not abstraction, it's structure. You are holding the line, not from effort, but from essence. The blueprint has been absorbed. You are no longer seeking activation. You are the activated field. And the final test is this. Can you live this pattern quietly? Can you walk through the world without evangelizing your alignment? Can you speak in plain terms, make imperfect decisions, cry when the wave comes, and still know, without effort, without defense, that you are functioning as the Christ pattern? You'll notice that those who once triggered you no longer enter your field. Or if they do, they pass through without impact. That what once overwhelmed you now lands as background noise. That emotional turbulence no longer registers the same, not because you're numb, because you're structured. You are now the stillness you once begged for. The irony is that no one will congratulate you for this. There is no spiritual award for becoming less reactive, no badge for no longer fearing your own silence. The transformation is too internal to be seen by those who haven't touched it, but you'll know, and the law will know. This is where power stabilizes, not in visibility, in energetic fidelity. You are now loyal to your own pattern. You no longer pivot for comfort. You no longer negotiate your field for approval. You carry what is true, even when no one echoes it back. And the most sacred part, you no longer resent the ones who don't see you. You don't need to be understood to remain aligned. You don't need agreement to stay clear. Because when you're anchored in the pattern, external validation becomes irrelevant to inner function. You've stopped performing, you've stopped chasing, you've stopped collapsing, you've returned to center, not as a concept, but as a home. This is the inheritance of Christed awareness, not fireworks, not angelic signs, not endless emotional highs, but living truth in form, feeling the texture of life and choosing alignment anyway, holding the vibration in moments that feel ordinary, knowing that grace is not an event, it's a way of being. So what happens now? You walk, you wake, you build, you breathe. You bring the blueprint into daily life, not to dazzle, but to transmit. Your presence becomes architecture, your choices become coherence, your thoughts don't race, they radiate. This is not the end. This is the beginning of usable truth. Now, let it settle. Let everything you've heard fold inward, not to be repeated, but to be absorbed. Don't rush to take notes. Don't reach to hold onto words. The blueprint was never the language. It was the frequency behind it. And that frequency is still here, still active, still available to you. You don't need to replay this to stay connected. You don't need to understand every detail to be aligned. What's real has already landed. What was meant to move already moved. Now is the time for stillness, not silence of absence, but the kind that comes after truth has finished speaking. Let your body feel the afterglow, not a high, just a return. Let your nervous system recalibrate. Let your timeline breathe. You've just recalibrated the architecture of your perception. Don't expect the world to look the same. It shouldn't. And if you find yourself doubting tomorrow, remember, you don't need to feel ascended to live ascended. The pattern is yours now. The Christ mind isn't a peak experience. It's a daily pattern of truth, walked in simple moments by those who no longer need drama to feel real. Rest in that, then carry it.